You'll die poor and alone. Melissa's voice cut through the apartment like glass. I froze mid-step, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at her as if my eyes could hold back the storm. At 65, widowed, and still renting a modest apartment in Chicago, I had already accepted a life defined by quiet survival. But I wasn't prepared for this. The words weren't angry. They weren't fleeting. They were sharp, deliberate, and final, as if pronouncing my fate aloud could make it true. Behind her, Daniel, my only son, shifted uneasily. His hands dug into the pockets of his slacks. His jaw was tight, the set of it familiar. One I'd seen since he was a boy afraid to contradict the world. "Mom, please," he murmured, his voice low, almost pleading. "Let's just talk. She doesn't mean it like that." I held the coffee cup tighter. My knuckles whitened. "Do you hear yourself?" I said. "Do either of you actually hear yourselves?" Melissa smirked and crossed her arms, tilting her head like a queen inspecting a pauper. "Oh, I hear perfectly. I see clearly, too. Look around. Daniel. This is your mother's life. She's alone. She's renting. She doesn't have a house. She doesn't have a savings account big enough to matter. She's irrelevant. Melissa?" Daniel tried, but his words faltered. His eyes darted between us, caught in that liminal space where a son wants to defend his mother, but fears angering his wife more. I let the silence stretch, letting Melissa's words linger in the air where they belong, to be chewed on, digested, felt. The apartment suddenly seemed smaller, as if her scorn had shrunk it. The beige couch I had bought with savings scraped together over decades felt worn, not from age, but from judgment. The photos on the wall, Daniel as a toddler, birthday parties we had celebrated quietly, and my late husband Arthur's smiling face, seemed to stare back at me with muted accusation. "Are you really nothing to them?" Melissa stepped forward, ignoring the invisible line of my space. "Honestly, Mom," she said, lowering her voice to a Fox sympathetic tone, "we're only worried about the future. You need someone to manage things. You can't keep doing this alone. Renting, living in a space too small for anything meaningful. You need help." I felt a tremor in my chest, but I didn't move. My voice, when it came, was calm, steady, but sharp. "And by help, you mean taking over my life. Taking over my choices. Treating me like a problem you've inherited." Melissa laughed. Not lightly, not politely. It was sharp, clinical. "Problem. You're a burden. And Daniel here." She gestured to him as if explaining the situation to a classroom of children. "He can't fully live his life until this is sorted. You don't own a thing. You don't provide anything. You're irrelevant, Mom. Face it." Daniel's face burned red, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. The boy I raised who still feared confrontation, the man who once held my hand through hospital corridors and midnight storms, now frozen by his wife's cruelty. "Mom, please. Don't push back like this. She's just concerned." "Concerned?" I asked, voice rising only slightly. "Concerned about what?" "That I'm renting. That I still make my own coffee and water my plants myself. That I have a quiet life instead of a mansion. You call that concern?" Melissa moved closer, her perfume hitting me like a wave, overpowering the faint scent of my roses by the window. "Concerned that one day you'll be helpless, and we'll have to clean up your mess. That's concern. That's reality. Face facts, Mom. You don't have what it takes. You'll die poor and alone. And honestly, that's not my problem. That's yours." I looked at her. Really looked. I saw the greed, the entitlement, the way her entire world was measured in what she could take from others. Then I looked at Daniel, my son, whose silence had condemned me before words ever could. My heart ached, not for myself, but for the boy I had raised, now so trapped by someone else's will that he forgot how to see truth. I took a deep breath, letting it fill me, grounding me. "Melissa, Daniel." I said slowly, deliberately, "You think I'm helpless. You think I'm alone. You think that renting a small apartment means I've failed. But here's what you don't see." I paused, looking around at the modest apartment, the photos, the life I had built quietly, carefully, alone. "You don't see strength. You don't see history. You don't see resilience. And most importantly, you don't see me." Melissa's smirk faltered slightly. Daniel's eyes widened, as if hearing my voice the way they used to when he was a boy and I explained the rules of the world. I continued, slower now, each word deliberate. "You think my life is nothing. That's your failure to understand it. You see poverty. I see freedom. You see loneliness. I see choice. You see irrelevance. I see everything I've earned and no one can take it from me. Not even you." A long silence stretched. The city hummed outside, oblivious. My son opened his mouth, then closed it. Melissa looked ready to argue, but I raised a hand. "Leave. Both of you. Go home. And when you think of me next, remember this: I am not a problem. I am not a failure. I am not irrelevant. And if you think I'm alone—" I let the words hang. "You don't understand what family really means." They left. Daniel hesitated at the door, guilt written across his face. "Mom," he whispered. I said nothing. Melissa's last words floated back into the apartment like smoke. "You'll die poor and alone." I smiled quietly, not bitterly, not angrily, but a smile of someone who had survived storms like this before and would survive them again. Alone, maybe, but strong, whole, and ready to fight in ways they could never imagine. And in the quiet, I began to plan. The apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the calm after the storm, the kind that allows reflection to seep into every corner. I sank into my worn armchair, the fabric soft beneath my fingers, and let myself breathe. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I was thinking, calculating. Not in anger, not in spite, but in clarity. Melissa had underestimated me. Daniel had faltered under her shadow, and I realized, for the first time in years, that I didn't need anyone to validate my life. I thought of my late husband, Arthur. He had died 10 years ago, leaving me with Daniel and a house that now felt more like a burden than a sanctuary. I remembered the night he passed, the way his hand had rested in mine, how he had whispered, "Trust yourself, love. You can handle it." Back then, it had been survival. Now it was strategy. Survival had turned into something sharper, something decisive. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank document, and began to type. Not a will. No, that wasn't it yet. A plan. A record. Documentation of everything: my finances, my assets, my apartment lease, my savings. If Melissa thought she could manipulate Daniel into taking control, I would ensure she had no leverage. I wrote down every account, every monthly expense, every minor investment Arthur and I had made over the years. Every detail mattered. Then I wrote a list of their behaviors, everything Melissa had said, every insult, every threat, every manipulation. I dated each event. I needed a record, a shield, and maybe, just maybe, a mirror to show Daniel exactly what he had allowed. Hours passed. The sky outside turned from a bright blue to a dim, rainy gray. I didn't notice. My pen scratched against paper as I made a second list: what I wanted. Not revenge, not exactly, but boundaries, respect, recognition. The right to live my life without intrusion, without judgment, without people measuring my worth against what they expected me to give them. By evening, I had crafted letters. One for Daniel, carefully phrased, calm, yet firm, explaining my perspective, my expectations, my boundaries. One for Melissa, short, pointed, and unyielding, outlining that her interference was unacceptable. But I did not send them yet. Timing was everything. As I sat back, I realized my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a long, buried excitement, the thrill of reclaiming agency. It had been so long since I had felt this power, the kind that didn't depend on money, on possessions, or on anyone's approval, the kind that lived in clarity, in knowledge, in control over one's own life. I walked to the small balcony outside my living room and looked at the city below. Rain-slicked streets reflected the neon of store signs, the headlights of cars, the life moving forward without hesitation. I pictured Daniel walking beside Melissa, caught in their illusion that he controlled his future, that I was just a minor obstacle. They had no idea how much I had seen, how much I remembered, how carefully I had watched every conversation, every subtle manipulation, every calculated smile Melissa had offered to ensnare him. That night, I slept lightly, dreaming not of fear, but of confrontation. Dreams of conversations where I would speak clearly, sharply, without flinching, without apologies, without manipulation. I saw myself handing over documents, showing facts, stripping away excuses. I saw Melissa's smirk faltering, Daniel's hesitation, their illusion of control crumbling. Morning came. I woke with a plan fully formed. The first step was small: control the narrative, ensure that everything I had built, everything I had fought for alone, remained untouched. I had a network, a few old friends, neighbors, a lawyer who had worked with Arthur years ago, someone who respected me and the meticulous records I kept. I would call them, quietly, methodically, not to create allies, but to ensure that if anyone attempted to interfere, I had proof, witnesses, and leverage. Daniel called mid-morning, hesitant, cautious. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice trembled slightly. I imagined Melissa hovering beside him, whispering what to say, how to phrase it, trying to control even his concern. But I let the silence stretch. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady, authoritative. I am fine, Daniel. I've never been better, and I need you to listen to me carefully. Everything going forward must be on my terms. He swallowed audibly. On your terms? Yes, I said, leaning back in my chair, arms crossed. You and Melissa have misunderstood your roles. You are no longer the ones who decide what I can or cannot do. You do not control my life. You do not control my assets. You do not control me. And if you think otherwise, I will show you why that is impossible. I could hear him trying to form words, to interject, but I held the line. This was not negotiation. It was assertion. A mother reclaiming her life after decades of accommodation, after years of being underestimated, after too many nights alone imagining what it would be like if someone respected her choices. By the end of the call, Daniel was quiet, and for the first time, I sensed fear, not fear of me, but fear of truth. Melissa's control, her smirk, her arrogance, was slipping, and I had not even begun. I set down the phone and smiled. The storm had not passed. In fact, it was only beginning. But for the first time in years, I felt ready. Not angry, not vengeful. Ready. And I knew this. If Melissa wanted a war, she would get it. But I would not fight her with rage. I would fight her with clarity, with precision, with the quiet power of someone who had survived everything and refused to be diminished again. Daniel arrived 2 days later, alone. I knew Melissa hadn't wanted him to come. She never liked situations she couldn't control, and this one had slipped from her fingers the moment I stopped apologizing. I watched from my window as his car parked along the curb, the hesitation visible even from that distance. He sat there longer than necessary, hands on the steering wheel, breathing like someone preparing for impact. When he finally knocked, I didn't rush to answer. I let him wait. Not to punish him, but to remind him that my time mattered too. You look tired, I said when I opened the door. He nodded, eyes scanning my face as if searching for weakness. You sound different, he replied. Calmer. I am calmer, I said, stepping aside to let him in, because I stopped pretending. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured coffee for both of us, noticing how his hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around the mug. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, layered with everything we had never said. Melissa thinks you're trying to manipulate me, he began. I smiled faintly. Of course she does. That's how manipulators see the world. Everyone else is always plotting. She says you're hiding something, he continued, that you've always been secretive about money. I was private, I corrected. There's a difference. Privacy protects. Secrecy deceives. He looked down. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you never asked, I replied gently. You assumed. And assumptions are comfortable. They don't require listening. Daniel leaned back, frustration crossing his face. She's scared, Mom. She says if something happens to you, we'll be responsible. For what? I asked. My life, my choices, my existence. He didn't answer. I stood and walked to the bedroom, returning with a thin folder. I placed it on the table between us, sliding it closer to him. These are copies, I said. Not everything, just enough. He opened it slowly. Bank statements, investment summaries, property documents. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. This can't be right, he whispered. It's right, I said. It's also mine. You're not poor, he said, disbelief thick in his voice. I was never poor, I replied. I was cautious. I lived within my means, I planned. Quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. Melissa thought. I know what Melissa thought, I interrupted. She thought renting meant desperation. That modesty meant ignorance. That age meant weakness. He rubbed his temples. She's going to be furious. That's not my concern, I said. This meeting isn't about her. It's about you. He looked up. Me? Yes. You stood there while she humiliated me. You let her rewrite our history. I need to know why. His shoulders slumped. I didn't want to fight. Every time I push back, she makes me feel like I'm choosing you over her. And you chose silence instead, I said softly, which was still a choice. Tears welled in his eyes. I didn't realize how much it hurt you. That's because you stopped seeing me, I replied. You saw a role, a responsibility, not a mother. He reached across the table, then hesitated, pulling his hand back. What do you want from me? I considered the question carefully. Respect, boundaries, and honesty. No more talking about me behind my back. No more planning my future without my consent. And Melissa? He asked quietly. That depends on her, I said. But I won't tolerate abuse disguised as concern. He nodded slowly, fear and clarity battling on his face. She won't accept this. Then she'll reveal who she really is, I replied. When Daniel left, he hugged me awkwardly, like someone relearning an old language. I watched him drive away, knowing this was only the beginning. Melissa would not stay silent. She would push back. Hard. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because now they knew something important. I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't alone. Melissa didn't wait long to respond. 2 days after Daniel's visit, I received a call from her number. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity, and the faint desire to confront her, won. Hello, I said, keeping my voice calm. Mom, she said, the word dripping with false sweetness. We need to talk. Daniel told me everything. I let the pause linger. Everything, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes? Everything, she said quickly. About your finances, the house, your will. How could you do this to us? To Daniel. To me. I laughed softly, the sound light but cutting. Do what? Protect myself? That's not how families work, she snapped. You can't just leave us out of your life and your plans. Daniel is your son. Daniel is my son. I agreed, but being family doesn't entitle anyone to control me, my life, or my choices. It certainly doesn't give anyone the right to treat me like a resource, a stepping stone, or a nuisance. Her voice became venomous. You're cruel. You've always been selfish, and now you're punishing Daniel and me for… what? Living. For living as you see fit at my expense. I said, you've spent years projecting your desires onto me, assuming my money and my house were yours to command. That's not living, Melissa. That's entitlement. There was a pause. I could almost hear her searching for words, for excuses, for any narrative where she was the victim. You think we don't care about you, she said finally, her voice trembling, but with a sharp edge. We just want what's fair. What's fair? I repeated, my tone now sharp. Tell me, Melissa, is fairness measured in control over someone else's life? Is it fairness when you manipulate your husband to convince him I am incapable? Is it fairness to call me poor and alone while I've lived a life you don't understand? Her silence was deafening. I could practically see the gears turning in her mind. I continued, I've been generous, but generosity is not obligation. I have sacrificed plenty, yes, but for love, not for leverage. For care, not for convenience. If Daniel or you expect my compliance, my life, my money, simply because of blood ties, you misunderstand everything about me. Melissa's voice broke. You think Daniel doesn't love me. You think he would choose me over you. I don't know what he thinks. I replied evenly. But I know what he does when left to his own conscience. He came to me willingly, without her pressure, without her schemes. He came because he wanted to understand, not because he was being told to act. The line went quiet again. Her breathing was sharp, ragged. Frustration, fear, and rage combined into something tangible even over the phone. I won't change my will, Melissa, I said finally. I've made my decisions. Daniel's father left him a strong example of integrity. I hope he learns from that, even if you refuse to see it. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll die poor and alone, and you'll have no one to care for you? Perhaps, I said calmly. But I'd rather be poor and alone than surrounded by greed and cruelty disguised as concern. The line went dead. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. I could feel a lightness in my chest, a clarity I hadn't had in years. The confrontation had not been comfortable, but it had been necessary. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, the roses now beginning to bloom in vibrant shades of red and pink. Each petal was a reminder that life could be beautiful, even after pain and betrayal. A knock at the door startled me. Daniel stood there again, holding a small box of seedlings. I thought I'd bring these, he said softly. For the garden. I smiled, genuinely this time. You don't have to, Daniel. I've already started planting. But thank you. We worked together in silence for a while, planting each seedling carefully, watching the soil cradle the roots. It was intimate, healing, and grounding. The act was simple, but it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Connection didn't have to be dictated by money or manipulation. When we finished, Daniel stood back and admired the small, burgeoning garden. It looks peaceful, he said. It is, I replied, and it can be more than that. It can grow with care, patience, and attention, just like our relationship. He nodded. I want that. I want to fix things with you, even if Melissa doesn't approve. Then let's start with honesty, I said. No more lies, no more pretending. If we can do that, maybe we can rebuild trust. Maybe we can find a way to be family again, on our terms, not hers. Daniel smiled, a tentative but genuine smile. I'm ready, Mom. I don't want to lose you. Not again. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Then don't. But remember, love isn't inherited, it's earned. And we'll have to earn it every day, together? The next morning, I woke to a quiet house, sunlight spilling across the freshly polished floors. For the first time in years, the silence felt like a gift, not an accusation. I poured myself coffee and sat by the window, watching the garden. The seedlings Daniel had brought were already beginning to take root, tiny green shoots poking through the dark soil. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The text read, "You think you've won. You haven't seen the last of us, Melissa." Of course, my chest tightened, but I refused to panic. She thrived on fear and control, feeding off my anxiety. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I called Daniel immediately. "Did Melissa send this?" I asked calmly, holding the phone between us. He sighed. "Yes. I'm sorry, Mom. She's unpredictable." Unpredictable is one word. Narcissistic and manipulative is another. I replied. "We need to anticipate her next move, Daniel. She's testing us, seeing if fear can make me change my mind about the will." He nodded. "I understand. But what if she tries to turn the family against you, or worse, takes legal action?" I looked him square in the eyes. "Let her try. The law is on my side. My decisions are documented, fair, and legal. Any attempt to coerce or manipulate me further will only strengthen my position." Daniel hesitated, his expression a mix of relief and worry. "I'm scared for you, Mom. She's relentless." "And I'm not alone anymore," I said firmly. "You're here. And I've built a network of friends, colleagues, and neighbors who respect me. I will not be intimidated, not by her, not by anyone." The hours passed. Daniel stayed for coffee, for a long conversation about life, family, and what had led us to this point. He opened up in ways he never had before, admitting his own mistakes and regrets. I listened, letting him speak without interruption, offering only the guidance I felt he needed. By midday, the phone rang again. This time, it was my lawyer, Catherine. "We have received a formal letter from Melissa's attorney," she said. "They're threatening to contest the will." I set the phone down and closed my eyes, taking a slow, deliberate breath. "I expected this," I said. "Thank you for letting me know, Catherine. We'll proceed as planned." Catherine's tone was cautious but supportive. "They've outlined a series of allegations, claims of coercion, manipulation, and elder abuse." I opened my eyes. "Then they've already lost before this even begins. My records, my letters, the documented meetings with Daniel. Everything proves my independence and competence. Melissa is trying to intimidate me, nothing more." Daniel had been listening quietly. He leaned closer. "Do you think she'll escalate?" I smiled faintly, feeling a strange thrill at the challenge. "Yes, she'll escalate. But each step she takes will reveal her motives. Each attempt to control me will expose her. And in the end, she'll have nothing. Not the house, not the money, not Daniel's loyalty. Nothing." The afternoon passed with us organizing my documents, reviewing the will, and mapping out a response strategy with Catherine. Daniel's demeanor shifted as the hours went on. The confident, entitled man who had stormed my house months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood responsibility, accountability, and the weight of choices. When the sun dipped low, Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, I've been thinking. About everything. About Melissa. About us. I want to help you, in any way I can. Not because I have to, not because she expects it, but because I love you." I reached out and took his hand. "That's all I ever wanted, Daniel. Not control, not money, not convenience. Love, respect. That's what makes a family." He squeezed my hand tightly, his eyes glistening. "I want to rebuild. Starting now. No more lies, no more pretending." We sat together in silence, letting the moment settle between us. The house, the garden, the coffee. Everything felt real, grounded, tangible. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with money, inheritance, or manipulation. Night fell, and Daniel left reluctantly, promising to return the next day. I stood at the doorway watching him drive away, a mixture of hope and apprehension swirling inside me. Melissa's storm was coming. I could feel it. But for the first time, I was ready. I returned to the living room and looked around. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a sanctuary. A place where I had reclaimed my voice, my choices, and my life. Melissa could threaten, yell, or attempt to manipulate, but she could not take this from me. Not anymore. As I prepared for bed, I felt a quiet determination. The coming days would be challenging, perhaps even cruel, but I was no longer afraid. I had Daniel, my clarity, and my truth. And with those on my side, I knew we could face whatever Melissa threw at us next. The next morning, the house was bathed in golden sunlight, yet the tranquility was deceptive. I could sense that Melissa was already mobilizing her army of threats and lies. Daniel was by my side, calm but alert. "Mom," he said as he poured us both coffee, "she's not going to let this go quietly. Be ready for anything." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. I've lived my life preparing for moments like this. Melissa's anger and entitlement are nothing I haven't faced before. Fear is her tool, not mine. We spent the morning reviewing documents, emails, and every correspondence with her and her lawyer. Each piece revealed a pattern manipulation, greed, and a desire to control. The more I read, the more I realized that Melissa had underestimated me completely. By late afternoon, Catherine called again. "They've filed preliminary papers. They're alleging undue influence, saying you were pressured to change your will." I let out a slow breath. "Catherine, document everything. Every interaction I've had, every phone call, every message. Their claims are baseless, and the more evidence we have, the stronger our position." Daniel frowned. "Mom, are you sure you want to go through all this? I mean, it could get messy public." I looked at him, my eyes firm. "Yes, because if I back down now, I give her power I don't deserve to give. This is about more than the will. It's about respect, dignity, and showing that a mother's voice matters. We can't allow her to rewrite reality just because she wants what isn't hers." He nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'll be with you every step." That evening, I heard the faint hum of tires outside. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Melissa. My heart rate increased briefly, but I controlled it. She couldn't intimidate me the way she used to. I watched from the window as she stormed up the walkway, designer heels clicking against the stones. Her face was a mask of fury and entitlement, the same expression she'd worn the day she mocked me for renting instead of owning. I opened the door before she could knock. "Melissa," I said evenly, "what brings you here?" She didn't answer at first, just looked at me with cold eyes. Then, in a voice dripping with contempt, "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" "I don't think, Melissa. I know," I replied calmly. "I'm prepared for your threats, your lies, your attempts to manipulate. But I am not afraid anymore." Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't expected, surprise. Perhaps she had assumed I would cower, beg, or negotiate. She hadn't counted on my resolve. Daniel stepped forward. "Melissa, I suggest you leave before things get complicated." She turned her gaze to him, lips curling in disdain. "Oh, Daniel, you've become your mother's ally. How touching. How pathetic." I took a deep breath. "You're here because you're afraid. Afraid that your plans, your entitlement, will fail. Melissa, this house, my decisions, my life, none of it is yours to claim. Not by law, not by morality, and certainly not by intimidation." Her shoulders stiffened. "You think the law is on your side? You think a judge will allow this? I'll fight you. I'll drag this through court. I'll make your life miserable." I stepped closer, eyes unwavering. "Melissa, I've anticipated your threats. I've prepared for your tactics. Go ahead and try. Every attempt you make will only confirm what we already know: your motives are greed, not love or care. And in the end, you will have nothing. Not the house, not the inheritance, not even my respect." She took a step back, fury and disbelief warring across her face. For a brief moment, I saw her falter. Then she shouted, "You'll regret this! You'll die alone!" I smiled softly, the calm of years of experience settling over me. "Melissa, I have already lived alone, rented, struggled, and survived. And you? You are the one tethered to entitlement and control. I may be alone at times, but I am free. Free from fear, free from manipulation, free from people who only value me for what I can give. And that is something you will never understand." Daniel exhaled, relief washing over him. Melissa's face twisted with rage. She looked like a storm ready to break, but she left without another word, slamming the car door so hard it echoed across the driveway. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the tension slip away. Daniel stood beside me. "She's dangerous, Mom. She'll escalate. But I've never seen you like this. Calm, collected, unshakable." I nodded. We've weathered storms, Daniel. This is just another one. And storms pass. Courage, preparation, and truth, they are stronger than fear, lies, and greed. Melissa will realize that sooner or later. We spent the rest of the evening reinforcing security measures, organizing documents, and planning for potential legal battles. The house felt alive with purpose. Not a battlefield, not a place of fear, but a sanctuary of strength. Before bed, I stood by the window looking out at the quiet garden. The roses Daniel had planted were beginning to bloom. Each petal, delicate yet resilient, reminded me of something vital. No matter how ruthless the storm, growth persists, and beauty can flourish even in adversity. Tomorrow, I thought, we would face Melissa's next move. But tonight, I would rest. I had survived her threats before, and I would survive them again. More than that, I would thrive. The following morning, the house felt lighter, almost as if it knew we were ready. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, the sunlight spilling across the table, reflecting off the polished wood. Daniel joined me, looking unusually thoughtful. "Mom, do you think Melissa will actually escalate this?" he asked quietly, stirring his tea. I smiled faintly. Of course she will. She thrives on drama. But escalation doesn't mean she wins. It just means she underestimates the strength she faces. And she's going to see just how prepared we are. We spent the morning drafting letters and organizing documents for our lawyer, Catherine. Every bill, every email, every text message that highlighted Melissa's manipulation went into the folder labeled evidence. We also prepared witness statements, friends and family members who had seen the way she treated me, how she dismissed me, mocked me, and tried to control my decisions. By afternoon, I felt the familiar tug of anxiety in my stomach. It wasn't fear of Melissa. It never was anymore. But anticipation. The anticipation of confrontation, of finally asserting boundaries that should have been respected decades ago. Daniel noticed my tension. "You're holding yourself back from doing what you always do best, facing things head on," he said. "I've learned patience," I replied. "Patience and strategy. Rushing and headlong without preparation only gives people like Melissa more ammunition. We wait, we observe, we strike with clarity and purpose." Around 3 p.m., the phone rang. I glanced at the display, Catherine. I answered immediately. "Yes! Mom, they've submitted additional motions. Melissa is requesting a temporary injunction on the house. She's claiming you're trying to evict her from her rightful place. They've used every term designed to make the judge sympathetic to her." I exhaled slowly. "Then we respond with facts, evidence, and clarity. Sympathy does not outweigh truth." Daniel, standing beside me, frowned. "Mom, you're calm, but this could get ugly. Really ugly. Melissa might try to make it public. Media, social circles, anything to humiliate you." I met his eyes. "Then let her. We are not afraid of truth. We are not afraid of exposure. We will not compromise our integrity, nor will we allow fear to dictate our actions." Later that evening, the front doorbell rang. I felt a familiar flutter in my chest, not of fear, but of resolve. Daniel opened the door cautiously. It was Melissa again, flanked by her attorney this time. The air shifted. Tension rolled off them like heat from a furnace. I greeted them with calm precision. "Melissa, I see you've brought legal representation. That's prudent. I'm prepared as well." Her lawyer, a tall man with slicked back hair, spoke first. "We're here to discuss your recent changes to the will. My client believes she's being unfairly excluded from assets she was promised." I nodded slowly. "Assets, yes. Promises, not so much. Melissa, we are not discussing gifts. We are discussing my decisions based on a lifetime of respect, trust, and treatment that has been sorely lacking from you and your husband. Everything I do, including my will, is my right. Nothing you believe is oud to you is factual." Melissa's face contorted. "You'll regret this! I'll make sure the world knows the truth." I stepped closer, voice steady. "The truth is not something to be manufactured or weaponized. The truth is what you choose to ignore, day after day. The truth is that I am a person with rights, not a source of funds. Your threats are noted, but irrelevant." The lawyer attempted to interject, but I held up a hand. "No, let's be clear. My actions are deliberate, legally sound, and documented. I am ready to defend myself, my property, and my will in court. You may attempt to challenge it, but each attempt will only reveal the extent of your entitlement and disregard for the truth." Melissa's fury was palpable. She spun on her heel and shouted, "You'll die poor and alone." I smiled gently, almost pitying her. "Melissa, I've already survived poverty, loneliness, and mockery, and I am thriving, You, on the other hand, are tethered to anger, greed, and disappointment. You are alone in ways that money cannot fix. Her lawyer glanced nervously at her, unsure how to proceed. I remained calm, poised, unshakable. I realized that every threat, every yell, every attempt to intimidate only made her more transparent. The truth had power, and I had it. Melissa finally stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I watched her car disappear down the street. Daniel exhaled and shook his head. She's relentless. I nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. And we are prepared. Every attempt she makes, we document. Every threat, every lie, we respond with clarity and calm. Strength is not loud. Strength is consistent, unyielding, and undeniable. Melissa is learning that today. That night, I sat in the study, reviewing every document, every plan, every possible move she could make. My mind was alert but at peace. I realized something vital. This fight was not just about a house or money. It was about reclaiming dignity, setting boundaries, and demanding respect. Outside, the night was quiet. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out at the garden. The roses Daniel had planted gleamed under the moonlight. Their resilience reminded me of my own. No matter how fiercely storms raged, life persisted. Growth was possible even in adversity. Tomorrow, I knew the battle would continue. But tonight I would rest, secure in the knowledge that courage, preparation, and truth were my allies. Melissa could rage, threaten, and scream, but she could not break me. Not anymore. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting long lines across the polished wooden floors. I was in the kitchen, sipping my first coffee, when Catherine called. Mom, they've filed another motion. This time it's for a temporary restraining order against you entering the property, she said, her voice calm but firm. I set the cup down, taking a deep breath. Then we respond with facts. Catherine, nothing else matters. Truth and evidence will carry this fight, not fear or intimidation. Daniel appeared behind me, rubbing his temples. Mom, are you sure about this? It's escalating fast. They're not holding back anymore. I turned to him with a soft but resolute expression. Yes, Daniel. Every escalation is a sign they think they can intimidate us, but that's just fear masquerading as power. We face it calmly, and we're already stronger than they realize. By mid-afternoon, we had organized everything. Emails, texts, witness statements, financial records, even videos showing Melissa's attempts to control and manipulate me. Every detail of her cruelty and entitlement was meticulously documented. This wasn't just a legal strategy, it was armor, and it felt good to know we were prepared. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Daniel opened it cautiously. Melissa stood there, her eyes burning with fury, flanked by her lawyer, an older man in a gray suit. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. I see you've brought legal representation, I said calmly, stepping to meet them in the foyer. That's wise. We are prepared as well. Her lawyer spoke first. We are requesting that you reverse the changes to the will. Our client believes she is entitled to assets that were promised to her. I smiled faintly. Melissa, you confuse entitlement with expectation. You are not owed anything by me. Every decision I make regarding my property and my will is my right. You may claim injustice, but the truth speaks louder than your arguments. Melissa's face twisted in rage. You'll regret this? I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you. I stepped closer, calm and unwavering. Melissa, the truth is not a weapon for you to wield. The truth is a mirror you refuse to see. I am a person with rights. I am not a resource. Threats do not intimidate me. They only reveal your desperation. Her lawyer attempted to intervene, but I held up a hand. No, let's clarify my decisions are deliberate, legally sound, and fully documented. Any attempt to challenge them will only demonstrate your disregard for truth and fairness. Melissa shrieked, venom in every word. You'll die poor and alone. I met her gaze and smiled gently. Melissa, I've survived poverty, mockery, and betrayal. I've thrived despite it all. You, on the other hand, are chained to greed, bitterness, and discontent. Money cannot fix what you lack inside. The lawyer looked uncertain, glancing at Melissa. She turned abruptly and stormed off, slamming the door with enough force that the walls trembled. Daniel exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. She's relentless, Mom. What if she escalates further? I touched his arm. And we will meet every escalation with preparation, calm, and clarity. Strength is not loud, it is measured, consistent, and unyielding. Melissa is learning that lesson today, and every day after. Later that evening, I retreated to the study to review every document again, meticulously planning for the next legal encounter. This wasn't about property or money. It was about dignity, respect, and establishing boundaries. I would no longer tolerate being treated as a convenience or an entitlement. Outside, the garden shimmered under the moonlight. The roses Daniel planted were resilient, blooming despite storms and neglect. Their persistence reminded me of my own journey, how I had endured manipulation, betrayal, and mockery, and still stood tall. The night was quiet, but anticipation hummed in the air. Tomorrow, Melissa would attempt another move, perhaps in court or through social channels. But no matter her tactics, I was ready. My armor was truth, my weapon was preparation, and my shield was calm resolve. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out at the moonlit garden. I felt a rare serenity, a blend of caution, readiness, and confidence. Melissa could rage, threaten, or attempt to humiliate me, but she could not break me. Not now, not ever. This was more than a legal battle. It was a reclaiming of power, of voice, and of self-respect. Every step, every preparation, every calm response reinforced that lesson. I would not bend, I would not compromise, and I would not allow fear to dictate my actions. The house felt alive with potential and resolve. Every creaking floorboard, every scent of blooming roses reminded me that I had built more than walls. I had built boundaries, and as long as I stood firm, as long as truth guided me, nothing Melissa could do would shake the foundation I had reconstructed in my own life. The next morning, I awoke to the soft hum of the city outside my window, a gentle reminder that life went on regardless of chaos within. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen table, reviewing the schedule for the day. Court documents, witness affidavits, and emails from Catherine littered the table, each piece meticulously catalogued, each detail a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. Daniel walked in, yawning and stretching. "Mom, are you sure you want to face her today? The court session isn't going to be easy." I looked at him calmly, eyes firm. "Daniel, nothing worth protecting ever is easy. Melissa wants a battle. We give her the law, the truth, and our composure. Nothing more, nothing less." By mid-morning, our car was loaded with binders, printed exhibits, and notes for cross-examination. Catherine, ever precise, had highlighted every moment of manipulation, entitlement, and emotional abuse Melissa had attempted to impose on me over the years. "If she thinks she can intimidate us, she's mistaken," she said, adjusting her glasses. The courthouse loomed ahead, grand and imposing, its steps lined with pillars that seemed to echo authority. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a mixture that always reminded me of justice in theory and practice. We passed through security, and I held Daniel's hand briefly, a quiet gesture of solidarity. Melissa was already there, her face a mask of controlled fury. Her lawyer hovered near, papers clutched tightly, eyes darting nervously as if anticipating failure. I stepped into the courtroom with Catherine beside me, every movement deliberate, every expression calm. The judge looked over his glasses and gestured for us to begin. Melissa's lawyer spoke first, launching into a passionate argument about entitlement, family obligation, and what they termed unfair disinheritance. The words sounded hollow in the grand hall. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "Your Honor, this is not about punishment. It is about self-preservation. I am asserting my legal right to distribute my property as I see fit. This decision is fully within my rights and supported by evidence of repeated mistreatment and manipulation by the opposing party." Melissa's face twisted with disbelief. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering sharply, but I did not flinch. The courtroom felt charged with tension, yet I remained a calm center in the storm. Catherine began presenting evidence. Texts where Melissa had threatened me, emails demanding money, instances where she had attempted to control my daily life. Each exhibit was irrefutable, and with each one, I noticed Melissa's composure begin to crack. "Your Honor," Catherine concluded, "we are not merely presenting evidence of entitlement disputes. We are presenting proof of coercion, emotional abuse, and attempts to manipulate an elderly individual for financial gain." The judge nodded, reviewing the documents with a discerning eye. Melissa's lawyer attempted to object, but the objections were overruled. Every attempt to twist the narrative in their favor was met with calm, precise counterarguments, facts, and evidence. Outside the courtroom, I could feel a shift, a subtle but palpable change. Even Daniel noticed it. "Mom, she's rattled," he whispered. I smiled faintly, though it was more a reflection of inner resolve than triumph. Rattled, yes, but not yet defeated. Patience and clarity win where anger and entitlement fail. By late afternoon, the proceedings adjourned for the day. We returned home in silence, the car filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment and lingering tension. I walked through the garden first, brushing my fingers over the roses. Each bloom seemed a reminder that growth often comes after patience, care, and resilience. Daniel poured us both tea, sitting across from me. Mom, you were incredible today, calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. Melissa didn't know what hit her. I sipped slowly, savoring the warmth. This is more than about Melissa. It's about reclaiming my voice, asserting my dignity, and ensuring no one can manipulate or control me again. Every confrontation reinforces that. It's not victory in court, it's victory over fear and expectation. Evening settled softly, and the house felt peaceful. The tension of the courtroom lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that preparation, clarity, and truth had guided every step. The roses outside caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing softly, a visual reminder that resilience, like beauty, persists through storms. Later, I reviewed the day's notes, planning strategy for the following session. Every argument, every piece of evidence, every detail of Melissa's past behavior was cataloged meticulously. Tomorrow would be another challenge, but now we were stronger, more confident, and fully prepared. As the night deepened, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully. The battle was not yet won, but the foundation was unshakable. Melissa's threats, anger, and manipulation could not penetrate truth, resolve, or dignity. The house settled into quiet, a sanctuary from chaos, a place where control, calm, and clarity could flourish. And tomorrow we would face her again, unafraid, unyielding, and uncompromised. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long, sharp lines across the polished floors of my living room. Today's court session promised to be the most intense yet. I could feel it in my bones. Daniel sat beside me, silently reviewing notes while I quietly sipped my coffee, watching the steam curl up like a signal of calm before the storm. Mum, Daniel said softly, breaking the silence. This is the day she'll really lose it. Melissa thinks she's in control, but she has no idea how prepared we are. I nodded, my thoughts drifting back to the first time I realized just how manipulative she could be. Every smile, every polite gesture was a calculated move. But today, she would see a side of me she could never predict, unyielding, unshakable, and fully aware of her own misdeeds. The courthouse was already bustling when we arrived. I felt a small pang of anxiety, not for myself, but for the weight of the day. Each step toward the courtroom felt heavier than the last, yet I walked with a determined poise. Catherine met us in the hallway, adjusting her blazer with her signature precision. "We're ready," she said simply. "Let's make sure she doesn't have a single inch to stand on." Melissa's face was already set in a mask of defiance, lips pressed thin, eyes darting between the judge and her lawyer. She looked confident, but there was a flicker of something I recognized. Doubt, maybe fear. That gave me a small measure of satisfaction. The session began with a sharp statement from her lawyer, full of entitlement-laden rhetoric, claiming that family obligations were being disregarded and that Melissa was being unfairly cut off. I listened, unflinching, letting every word hang in the air like smoke before responding. "Your Honor," Catherine began, "the evidence presented clearly demonstrates a pattern of emotional coercion and manipulation. We are not disputing the mother-son relationship, but rather asserting the right of an individual to distribute their assets as they deem appropriate. This is about respect, boundaries, and the preservation of dignity." Melissa's expression faltered slightly, but her pride kept her composed. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering fiercely, and he responded with a nod, papers rustling in protest. But nothing could alter the truth laid before them. We moved into the evidence, meticulously cataloged photographs, emails, and texts illustrating Melissa's attempts to control me. Every demand, every angry outburst, every condescending remark had been saved, documented, and highlighted. The courtroom was silent as the judge perused the pages, his brow furrowed slightly with concentration. Daniel whispered to me, "She's sweating, Mom." Even her lawyer looks uncomfortable. I offered a small smile, but remained focused on the proceedings. There was no room for emotion now, only clarity and truth. Catherine Cross examined with precision, asking questions that highlighted contradictions in Melissa's narrative. "Isn't it true," she asked, "that you once threatened your mother if she did not provide financial support for your lifestyle, that you disregarded her requests for boundaries?" Melissa hesitated, visibly rattled. That's not how it happened," she stammered. "The evidence shows otherwise." Catherine countered calmly. And how do you justify the repeated incidents where you attempted to manipulate her for your benefit? Melissa's composure began to crack. Her jaw tightened. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched at the papers in front of her. Daniel noticed and gave me a subtle nod. She was breaking down under the weight of facts and truth. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the documents once more. I see a clear pattern of emotional abuse and coercion. The mother's decision to protect herself and her assets is within her legal rights. His words rang through the room like a final verdict, and I felt a wave of relief and validation wash over me. After the session ended, we walked back to the car. The air was crisp, filled with the faint smell of spring blooms. Daniel looked at me with admiration and relief. "Mom, you were incredible." She didn't see that coming. I smiled faintly, feeling the tension begin to dissolve. This is about more than court, Daniel. It's about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my voice. Today, we did more than present evidence. We established boundaries that cannot be crossed again. Returning home, I poured a fresh cup of coffee and walked into the garden. Each rose bush seemed to glow in the late afternoon sunlight, a visual testament to patience, care, and resilience. Melissa may have been defeated today, but the true victory was my own empowerment and clarity. Sitting quietly, I reflected on the journey, the years of subtle manipulation, entitlement, and emotional abuse. Today was a turning point, not because of legal triumph, but because I had finally stood up fully for myself, without compromise, without fear, and without guilt. As evening settled, the house embraced a quiet serenity. The battle was not entirely over, but the foundation had been laid. Melissa had been confronted, her attempts at control dismantled, and I could finally breathe, knowing that tomorrow would bring only progress, clarity, and the continued assertion of my dignity. The next morning, I woke to a calm I hadn't experienced in years. The sunlight spilled across the floors, casting warm, golden streaks on the walls. I moved through the house slowly, savoring the silence. Daniel was already in the library, reviewing notes for the final court appearance. He looked up when I entered, his face serious but tinged with excitement. "Mom," he said, "today is it? The last hearing. We close this chapter for good." I nodded, taking a deep breath. I had thought about this moment countless times, replaying every interaction with Melissa, every moment of entitlement and condescension, and every time Edward had stood silently, complicit or indifferent. Today, it would end one way or another. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. I could feel the tension, thick and suffocating. People whispered as we walked past, sensing the gravity of the day. Melissa's eyes met mine for a brief moment. She tried to maintain her composed facade, but there was a flicker, an involuntary glance that betrayed her anxiety. Her lawyer started the session with the usual arguments, insisting that the mother-son bond required her financial support and that Melissa's expectations were justified. I sat quietly, letting their words hang, knowing that the truth would speak louder. Catherine stood, calm and precise. "Your Honor, the documents and testimony provided over the past hearings illustrate repeated patterns of manipulation, coercion, and emotional abuse. The mother's decisions are not only legally valid but morally justified, aimed at protecting her dignity and autonomy." Melissa's confidence wavered. She shifted in her seat, hands fidgeting with the edge of her suit. Edward sat beside her, his face pale, and I could see the tension etched into every line. Even he seemed to understand, finally, the consequences of their actions. The presentation of evidence began. Emails, recorded conversations, and witness statements laid bare the manipulation and entitled demands Melissa had made. I felt a quiet satisfaction, watching the cracks form in her armor. Every statement contradicted her narrative. Every piece of evidence highlighted the gap between reality and the story she had crafted. "Isn't it true," Catherine asked during cross-examination, "that you repeatedly pressured your mother to relinquish control of her finances, her home, and her life? That you treated her as a resource rather than a person?" Melissa's face reddened. That's not fair!" "I was just trying to protect the family, to help." "Help." Catherine's voice was calm but piercing. "By threatening, manipulating, and attempting to coerce your mother. Is that your definition of help?" Melissa hesitated, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her features. Edward shifted uncomfortably beside her, his eyes not meeting hers. He was listening, really listening, to the evidence and the truth of her actions. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents with careful scrutiny. "I see a clear pattern of coercion and emotional abuse. The mother's actions to safeguard her autonomy and property are within her legal rights and morally justified. His words struck like thunder, and I felt a surge of relief and validation. Melissa's face turned pale. She glanced at Edward, hoping for support, but he remained silent, absorbing the judgment. Daniel whispered, "She's breaking, Mom. Even her lawyer knows she's lost." I remained calm, my heart steady. This wasn't just about legal victory, it was about reclaiming my life, my voice, and my peace. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the reality of the situation settled in. Melissa's ambition and greed had finally collided with truth and consequence. The hearing concluded, and we left the courthouse, the crisp air a stark contrast to the tension inside. Edward looked at me, eyes filled with remorse and understanding. "Mom, I see it now. I finally see how wrong it was. I'm sorry." I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of years begin to lift. "Edward, this isn't about punishment. It's about understanding, about boundaries, and about rebuilding, if that's even possible. We'll see." Returning home, the garden greeted me like an old friend. The roses I had planted weeks ago had begun to bloom, resilient and vibrant. I poured a cup of coffee and sat among them, reflecting on the journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, and now, the reclamation of my life. Melissa may continue to fume and protest, but her control over me was gone forever. I felt a quiet hope. Today, justice had been served, not just in court, but in the assertion of my dignity, my autonomy, and my voice. Tomorrow would be brighter, not because the past was forgotten, but because the future could now be shaped by my choices alone. The morning sun poured through the windows as I sipped my coffee, feeling the serene satisfaction of finally reclaiming my life. The house felt alive again, not with the tension of entitlement, but with the warmth of choice and autonomy. Daniel had already left for work, and I had the entire day to myself, to savor the quiet I had fought so hard to preserve. The phone rang mid-morning. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello," I said, steady, cautious. "Mom, it's Edward." His voice cracked, fragile and unguarded. "Can I come over? I want to talk." My heart skipped. After everything, the betrayal, the confrontation, the months of silence, he was finally reaching out. "All right, this afternoon," I replied calmly. "Just you. No one else." When he arrived, he stepped out of his car with a tentative hesitation I had never seen before. Gone was the confident, entitled man who had once demanded my inheritance. In his place stood someone smaller, quieter, uncertain, yet undeniably earnest. I met him at the door, noting the subtle changes, how the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly, how his eyes searched for connection instead of opportunity. The living room had been rearranged since our last encounter. Books lined the shelves, photographs of family and friends decorated the walls, and soft light illuminated the space. I gestured toward the sunroom. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, and we settled into the wicker chairs by the window.
"I am sorry, Mom,"
he said, voice trembling. "For everything. For not defending you. For letting her treat you that way. For not being the son you deserved." I felt a lump in my throat. The words were heavy, carrying the weight of genuine remorse. I had imagined this moment, but the reality was more complex than relief. It was fragile, tentative, and deeply human. "Edward," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't immediate. It takes time. But acknowledgement is a start." He nodded, staring at his hands. "I understand. I never realized how blind I was. How much I let greed and convenience dictate my choices. She manipulated us both, and I failed to see the truth." I leaned back, absorbing the sight of him. Not the son who demanded my assets, but the boy who had once trusted and loved unconditionally, who now sought to rebuild. "The will isn't going to change," I said firmly. "The house, the money, it's all designated for the Silver Circle Foundation. That part of our story is settled. But you can be here, if you choose, not for entitlement, not for expectation, but to learn what it means to give and to respect." He exhaled, a mix of relief and sorrow. "I'll accept that, Mom. I want to try to be better. Not just for you, but for me. For the person I should have been." We spent hours in the garden afterward. I showed him the roses, now fully bloomed, each petal a symbol of resilience and growth. He planted a small row of marigolds, his hands tentative at first, then more confident. "I remember planting with you as a kid," he said quietly. "I'd like to do that again." As we worked together, I realized that this moment was more than reconciliation. It was a new beginning. Edward had the chance to redefine his relationship with me, not as a mother in law's hair, not as a convenient presence, but as a human being striving for genuine connection. And I, for the first time in decades, felt the weight of control ease, replaced by hope. When the day ended, we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of roses and marigolds. "Mom, thank you," Edward said softly, for giving me a second chance, for not shutting me out completely. I smiled, a genuine, serene smile. Edward, love isn't about inheritance or control. It's about understanding, respect, and presence. We'll rebuild, slowly, and only if we choose to. As he drove away, I watched the rearview mirror until his car disappeared from view. The house was quiet once more, but not lonely. It was a sanctuary, a home reclaimed not just from greed and expectation, but from the shadows of past pain. I returned to my garden, sitting among the blooms, reflecting on the journey. The betrayals, the heartbreak, the confrontations, all of it had led to this moment of clarity. Melissa's manipulation had been defeated, Edward's understanding had begun, and my life had returned to my hands. The Silver Circle Foundation would benefit from the house, yes, but more importantly, my home had become a place of choice, respect, and life lived fully on my terms. Edward might visit, might learn, and maybe, in time, we'd find a new rhythm, one built on genuine love, not obligation. I poured a cup of tea and watched the sunset. Peace, hard-won and undeniable, wrapped around me. I had survived, endured, and reclaimed my voice. The story that began with mockery and betrayal ended in understanding, resilience, and the possibility of a real, chosen family.